Okay, we're rolling. We are live once again here on the Hoplite channel. I am your host, Hop, as always. Glad to see you. Welcome. If you clicked on this video, you wanted to see Norse literature, the Prose Edda, Part 2. So we are picking up here with Part 2 of the Prose Edda, following on Part 1, where I introduced us to the Gylfi, which is the opening segment to the Prose Edda. And it's a story that Snorri Sturluson compiled for his readers to learn about the Norse myths. And we left off with the creation and the destruction myths. How the world was created in the Norse mind, and how the world would end as far as the Norse foresaw it. Right, so now we're going to pick up with Part 2, and I'm not going to waste any time again because I said these readings are a little bit longer. So to keep people's attention going, we're going to have to plow right through it and hopefully not lose too many people from the length of the reading. But it's interesting stuff. If you like these myths, if you like the Marvel movies that put the Norse gods on the silver screen, or if you're like me, if you read the comic books when you were a kid, this stuff's kind of cool to learn about as far as the origin of those comics, of those movies, and why they're so popular and they endure today. As I said, we're going to jump into the underlying myths that the Norse world was based on. But first, let's talk about the actual characters, the actual participants of these myths before we go into the myths themselves. Right. So as we'll take from the readings here in the Prose Edda, we'll cover 9 different deities. Again, right, 9, the magical number 9. We'll see that appear later in these works as well, why 9 was such a significant number to the Norse. But I chose 9. And they are Thor, right? We all know Thor, right? The Thunderbringer, the Hammer Swinger. Then we have Baldr. And next we have Njord and Skadi. Then we jump to Frey and Freya. Then Tyr. Then Bragi, Heimdall, Loki, can't forget Loki, and finally the Valkyrie. So yeah, I will now read from some of the sections in the Prose Edda as Odin, the 3, as we remember from Part 1, describes them to King Gylfi, who's still calling himself Gangleri. All right, and I have the Prose Edda right here, and again, I will do the read along for you to follow. But before I do, let's pour ourselves another beverage, right? Said this would be a tradition. Don't aim to stop now. Fill that horn. Yeah. The Coca-Cola Viking horn. All right. Cheers. Skål. Okay, let's do this. We jump to page 32. The section begins, Thor. Then Gangleri said, "What are the names of the other Aesir? How do they occupy themselves? What have they done of importance?" Hai replied, "Thor is the foremost among them, called Thor of the Aesir, Asa Thor, and Thor the charioteer, Oku Thor. He is the strongest of all gods and men. He rules at the place called Thrudvangar, Plains of Strength, and his hall is called Bilskirnir. There are 540 living places in the hall, and it is the largest building that men have erected. So it says in the Lay of Grimnir. 500 rooms and 40 more are found, I believe, when counted in Bilskirnir. Of those residences whose roofs I recognize, my son's I know is largest. Thor has 2 male goats called Tenignoist, Tooth Gnasher, and Tenigsnir, Snarltooth. He also owns the chariot that they draw, and for this reason he is called Thor the charioteer. He too has 3 choice possessions. One is the hammer Mjolnir. Frost giants and mountain giants recognize it when it is raised in the air, which is not surprising, as it has cracked many a skull among their fathers and kinsmen. His second greatest treasure is his Megingjard, the belt of strength. When he buckles it on, his divine strength doubles. His third possession, the gloves of iron, are also a great treasure. He cannot be without these when he grips the hammer's shaft. No one is so wise that he can recount all of Thor's important deeds. I myself can tell you so many significant tales about him that hours would pass before I have said all I know. Okay, so here we're talking about Thor, right? The god of thunder. The Aesir, who is the strongest among them all. And he has this ability to swing this hammer Mjolnir. And from the movies, we know, obviously, that that's his most famous weapon. And it's probably the most famous weapon in all of Norse mythology, even more so than Odin's spear, Gungnir. Yeah, Mjolnir, according to Thor here, cannot be wielded, however, unless Thor is also wearing this belt of strength, the Mygingard, and his iron gloves. And that's something I think the movies and the comics left out of the equation, was that Mjolnir was such a mighty weapon that even Thor himself could not properly wield it unless he was wearing this belt, which doubled his strength, and also had these iron gloves as well. But in any event, he's considered the most famous among the gods, apart from Odin. He is the strongest of them all. And I would say he's probably more an equivalent to the Greek hero, the demigod Hercules, right? Hercules was the strongest of all men, the strongest among the gods as well. He had this incredible strength that was hard to fathom. Thor, however, has this strength, but he's also the lightning bringer. So we see in the Norse world, he has this similarity with Hercules in strength, but he also has this power to wield the thunderbolt like Zeus. So Odin is the closest, I guess you would say, equivalent in Norse mythology to Zeus. However, Thor also wields a Zeus-like power, which was to throw the lightning bolt. So it's interesting that the Norse gave Thor this ability when the Greeks regarded it as something that was probably the most awesome sight you could see in the ancient world and not have the ability to explain, which was a thunderstorm and lightning strikes. Okay, we'll continue on and we'll go to Baldr. Then Gangleri said, I would like to hear about the other Aesir. Hai said, Odin's second son is Baldr, and there is much good to tell about him. He is the best, and all praise him. He is so beautiful and so bright that light shines from him. One plant is so white that it is likened to Baldr's brow. It is the whitest of all plants, and from this you can judge the beauty of both his hair and his body. He is the wisest of the gods. He is also the most beautifully spoken and the most merciful. But one of his characteristics is that none of his decisions is effective. He lives at the place called Breidablik. It is in heaven, and no impurity may be there. As is said, Breidablik it is called, where Baldr has made for himself a hall, in that land where I know there are the fewest perils. Okay, so Baldr, right? He's considered the fairest of all the gods. He's the best looking. He's the wisest. He's the most kind. He lives in a place with no impurity. It's like the guy walks on water, right? He's just great. I mean, how could you not like the guy? He almost has no faults. But as we'll see in one of the myths, of the mistletoe with Loki and Freya, it's because of his good nature, perhaps, that he is taken advantage of. And as it says, he makes these wise decisions, but they come to little or no effect. It's almost like, if you know the Greek myth of the Cassandra, she has the gift of prophecy. However, nobody ever takes her prophecy to heart. They just say, oh, the Greeks are going to sack Troy. Is that right? Okay, all right, Cassandra. Yeah, sure, whatever you say. All right, wheel the horse in. And later that night, everybody gets slaughtered. And Cassandra's like, I told you so. And everyone's dead, so it doesn't matter. So Baldr has this problem. He's considered one of the wiser and fairer of the gods, except none of his decisions come to fruition. So it's a curse to have this ability. But Baldr is considered like, he's the golden boy. He's the favorite of the gods for good reason. He doesn't get as much attention as Thor or Loki or Odin because he doesn't really have these human faults. He is almost like the perfect kid. Okay, let's move. We go to Njord and Skadi. The third god is named Njord. He lives in heaven at the place called Noatun, a closure for the ships. He rules over the movement of the winds, and he can calm sea and fire. One invokes him in seafaring and fishing. He is so rich and prosperous that he can grant wealth in lands or valuables to those who ask for his aid. Njord is not of the Aesir family. He was brought up in Vanaheim, but the Vanir sent him as a hostage to the gods. In return, they took as a hostage from the Aesir the one called Hjörnir, and his exchange contributed to the peace between the gods and the Vanir. Njord has a wife called Skadi, the daughter of Thiazi, the giant. Skadi wanted to live in the home that her father had owned up in the mountains of Thrymheim, or Thunderhome, but Njord wanted to be near the sea. They came to an agreement that they would stay 9 nights in Thrymheim and the next 3 nights at Noatun. But when Njord returned to Noatun from the mountains, he said, "Hateful for me are the mountains. I was not long there, only 9 nights. The howling of wolves sounded ugly to me after the song of swans." Then Skadi said this, "Sleep I could not on the seabeds for the screeching of the bird. That gull wakes me when from the wide sea he comes each morning." Then Skadi went up to the mountains and lived in Thrymheim. She travels much on skis, carries a bow, and shoots wild animals. She is called the ski god or the ski lady, as is said. Thrymheim it is called, where Thiazi lived, the mighty giant. But now Skadi, pure bride of the gods, lives in her father's old house. Okay. Sounds like a domestic dispute going on here. So we've got Njord, right? And he's pretty much the Poseidon god. He's like the god of the sea. Seafarers and people who travel the oceans and the rivers and the straits, they would pray to Njord. And Skadi is his wife. And Skadi is the daughter of a giant Thiazi. And we may read the myth of Thiazi. But they're married, and what do you know? They can't agree on where to live. So Njord says, "All right, well, I'll tell you what. I will live with you up in the mountains, even though I hate it. I'd much rather be by the beach, and we'll do it for 9 nights." Right? There's that number 9 again. So he lives up there, and when he gets off the mountain, he's like, "I hate it. That place sucks. It's good to be back by the ocean." Skadi is the opposite. She likes her home in the mountains, and she gets to live by the oceans every 3 nights. And she doesn't like the sound of the gulls in the ocean either. So again, sounds like domestic bliss. But we know that Skadi is a hunter, and she hunts animals with her bow, and is the goddess of skiing, rather. So she could be, I guess you would say, a version of the Greek god Artemis, the goddess of the hunt. So we have Artemis and Poseidon. They can't agree on where to live, so they literally they buy a house in the mountains, and they have a timeshare by the beach, and that's where they split their time. Okay, let's move on. Next, we move to Frey and Freya. After this, Njord of Noatun had 2 children. The son was called Frey, and the daughter Freya. They were beautiful and powerful. Frey is the most splendid of the gods. He controls the rain and the shining of the sun, and through them the bounty of the earth. It is good to invoke him for peace and abundance. He also determines men's success in prosperity. Freya is the most splendid of the goddesses. She has a home in heaven called Volkvangar, or warriors' fields. Wherever she rides into battle, half of the slain belong to her. Odin takes the other half, as it says here. Volkvang it is called, and there Freya decides. The choice of seats in the hall, half the slain she chooses each day, and half belongs to Odin. Her hall, Sesrumnir, with many seats, is large and beautiful. When she travels, she drives a chariot drawn by 2 cats. She is easily approachable for people who want to pray to her, and from her name comes the title of honor, whereby women of rank are called Fovnir, or ladies. She delights in love songs, and it is good to call on her in matters of love. Is that right? Okay. So we have Frey and Frey here, and that's the son and daughter of Njord. So they're also both Vanir. They're not Aesir. And this trading between the gods, this was like a hostage negotiation, right? The Aesir and the Vanir are the 2 different races of gods. They go to war because, well, why should they share things? And it comes to a stalemate. But they agree to a tenuous peace. And the peace is based on this. You give us some of your gods as hostages, we'll give you some of our gods as hostages. And as long as you keep our gods in good stead, we'll keep your gods in good stead. They'll have places in our Aesir government. Our gods will have places in your Vanir hierarchy, and then we'll all get along, right? So what happens? When this trade occurs, they intermarry. The Vanir sometimes marry Aesir. The Aesir will marry the Vanir. You will have this cross-pollination of Vanir and Aesir. The Aesir that go to Vanaheim, they breed with some Vanir. The Vanir that go to Asgard, they breed with some Aesir. And Frey and Freya are offspring of the Vanir Njord. And Frey is essentially the god of harvest, like Demeter, although Demeter was a female. But you could also say he could be a similar god to that of the Greek Apollo, right? He rides this chariot, peace and prosperity, when you want to seek it, come from him. And he controls the rain and the shining sun and the bounty of the earth. Freya is also like Athena as the goddess of war, right? Volkvangar, which I couldn't remember last time for the life of me, which is the warriors' fields. This is the Norse version of the Greek fields of Elysium, right? The Elysian fields, where warriors who died in battle would walk in these plains and they would be soldiers for the rest of their lives. Or if they were carpenters in their spare time, they could be carpenters. It was a field of bounty and of sunshine, and it was a beautiful place to be. Probably not as desirable as Valhalla, if you asked your average everyday Viking. But Folkvangar was a good place to go. And Freya got to decide which half of the slain went to Volkvangar and which half would go to Valhalla. And I guess if you got to go to either, count yourself lucky, because both those places are more desirable than Niflhel or Muspelheim. But anyway, Freya, like I said, she's probably more like the goddess Athena, but she also has qualities similar to Apollo. She has a chariot drawn by two cats, which is weird, right? Why not like magnificent horses or like big oxen? Like Thor. Thor has a chariot that are drawn by two goats. This guy's big as crap. He carries a hammer that he needs a power belt and gloves to wield, and yet there are two goats pulling around his cart. It's like, couldn't you have found something bigger? Like, didn't the Norse have like trolls that could be used for like beasts of burden? Didn't make any sense to me when I read it. I'm like, goats? Why does he have freaking goats? And why does Freya have cats drawing her chariot? Like, why not fire steeds or horses? Odin gets Sleipnir for his horse, but that's besides the point. She is the goddess of war. She has Apollo qualities, but as we read at the end there, she also delights in love songs. And it's good to call on her in matters of love. So you could say she's kind of like Aphrodite too. So she's a jack of all trades, a Jill of all trades. War, heaven, and love. Okay, yeah, that's Freya. Let's move on to Tyr. Then Gangleri said, "The Aesir seem to me to be very powerful, and it is not surprising that there is so much strength in you, since you know so much about the gods and are aware of to whom each kind of prayer should be directed. Are there still more gods?" Hai answered, "Tyr is the name of another of the Aesir. He is the boldest and most courageous, and it is very much up to him who wins the battle. For men of action he is good to invoke. The expression goes that a man is Tyr courageous if he is the type who advances out in front, never losing his courage. Tyr is so wise that a clever person is said to be Tyr-wise. It is a mark of his daring that when the Aesir tried to lure the wolf Fenrir in order to place the fetter Gleipnir on him, the wolf would not trust the gods to free him until they finally placed Tyr's hand as a pledge in the wolf's mouth. Then, when the Aesir refused to free him, the wolf bit off the hand at what is now called the wolf joint. Because of this, Tyr is one-handed, and men do not think of him as a peacemaker." Okay, fascinating. That was nice of the gods, right? Tyr's like, I'm a brave dude. Okay, well, we're going to have to bind this wolf. The wolf's huge, by the way. Can you help us out? Yeah, like I said, I'm brave. What do you need? The wolf, get this. The wolf wants you to put your hand in his mouth because he doesn't trust us. Imagine that. Tyr's like, okay. And then what do the gods do? They don't honor their pledge to Fenrir, and Fenrir just chomps his hand off. So, that's what happened to Tyr. That's why he's the one-armed god, the one-handed god. But anyway, Tyr is the Norse version of Ares. He's the god of war. He decides the winners and the losers. Now, you could say that Odin is perhaps the main god of war. People looked up to Odin when it came to warfare as well. But Tyr was considered a secondary god of war, and this was his primary purpose, to show bravery, to be the decider in terms of combat, in terms of battle, who would win, who would lose. So you would be wise to pray to Tyr when it came to warfare. But also Odin, because obviously you want to cover both bases. Okay, let's move on to Bragi. One of the gods is called Bragi. Though renowned for his wisdom, he is mostly known for his eloquence and his way with words. He is the most knowledgeable about poetry, and because of him poetry is called Brag. From his name comes the usage whereby a person more skilled with words than others is called Bragger, or the foremost of men or women. His wife is Idun. In her private wooden box she keeps the apples which the gods bite into when they begin to grow old. They all become young again, and so it will be right up to Ragnarok. When Gangleri said, "It seems to me that the gods are greatly dependent upon Idun's care and good faith," Hai said as he laughed, "Misfortune once came close. I could tell you about those events, but first you shall hear the names of still more Aesir." Okay, so Bragi, right? And Odin says it himself. It's where we get the word brag, or a braggart, or someone who's a bragger. To be wise and to be fancy with your speech, to be eloquent in word. To be a wordsmith is to be, in the Norse world, a bragger. Someone who is given the gifts of speech by the god Bragi. Right. And we know that Bragi derives a lot of his speech from actually a famous concoction, which would be from Kvasir's mead. And we might read that myth as well, which is kind of cool. But so he alludes to this wife of Bragi, Idun, right? Idunn. But Eden, what does that sound like? Yeah, it sounds like the Christian Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve lived. And I think in part one I made a mistake where I said Cain killed Abel and then they had to move out of the Garden of Eden. That happened after the fact. Eve gave Adam the apple. Adam trusted his wife. Big mistake. He bites into the apple. God comes down and says, okay, both of you get out. And then outside the gates of Eden, the first murder occurs, right? Because that's where it would happen. It would not happen in the garden. But it's interesting that it's Eden who gives the gods, the Aesir, these magical golden apples, right? The apple comes from Eden. And the apple is what keeps these gods young. The gods have to feast on these golden apples of Eden every time they begin to grow old so they can be rejuvenated. And there's a myth in the Prose Edda where someone steals these apples and the gods begin to freak out because they start to grow old and they're afraid of dying before Ragnarok. And Odin here laughs about it because he says, yeah, we had a close call with one of those apples. Maybe I'll tell you the story sometime, but let's learn next about Heimdall. Okay. Page 36. Heimdall is one. He is called the White God and is powerful and sacred. 9 maidens, all sisters, gave birth to him as their son. He is also known as Hallingskidi and Gulintani, gold-toothed, as his teeth are gold. His horse is called Gulltopp, golden forelock. He lives near Bifrost at a place called Himinbjorg. He is the watchman of the gods and sits at heaven's end, where he keeps watch over the bridge against the mountain giants. He needs less sleep than a bird, and he can see equally well by night or by day a distance of 100 leagues. He hears the grass growing on the earth and the wool on sheep, as well as everything else that makes more noise. He has the horn known as Gjalhorn, and its blast can be heard in all worlds. Heimdall's sword is called a head. It is said, Himmelbjorg it is called, and there Heimdall rules over sacred places. There the watchman of the gods drinks in his comfortable lodgings, happily the good mead. Further, he himself says in Heimdall's chant, of 9 mothers I am the child, of 9 sisters I am the son. All right, that's interesting, right? So Heimdall, yeah, if you remember he from the movie in Thor, it's played by Idris Elba. So in the movie, Heimdall's a black guy. But here it says, he is called the white god and is powerful and sacred. So yeah, he's called the white god. In the movie, he's a black guy. Whatever. So that's Hollywood for you. So his teeth are gold too. That's kind of cool. Like a grill. He's like a white guy with a grill. That's kind of absurd. He lives near the Bifrost. And yeah, he's the watch god. He's like the watchdog. He guards this gate between heaven and earth, between Asgard and Midgard. And he can hear grass growing. He can hear sheep grow wool on their backs, which I wonder what that sounds like. But anyway, he has this sword, and he determines who crosses over the Bifrost and who's allowed entry into what. Which actually begs the question, Gangleri, didn't you run into Heimdall? Like, you're here talking to the 3, the High, the Justice High, and the 3rd. That's Odin. You're in Valhalla. So how in the hell did Heimdall let you in? Like, if you're some old man who disguised himself like this, you must have run into Heimdall. And what did he say to you? It's like, oh, hey, what's up, man? He's like, hey, is that Valhalla? Yeah. Can I just, go ahead, whatever. Like, where was Heimdall? He needs less sleep than a bird. How did he miss this guy Gangleri? I think Odin probably should have asked that off the bat. It's like, how did you get here? Didn't you meet a guy named Heimdall? It never comes up. Whatever. Let's move on to Loki. Oh, Loki. All right, page 38. Also counted among the Aesir is one whom some call slanderer of the gods, the source of deceit and the disgrace of all gods and men, named Loki or Lopt. He is the son of the giant Farbaudi. His mother is named Laufey or Nal, and his brothers are Bylist and Helblindi. Loki is pleasing, even beautiful to look at, but his nature is evil, and he is undependable. More than others, he has the kind of wisdom known as cunning and the treacherousness in all matters. He constantly places the gods in difficulties and often solves their problems with guile. His wife is Sigyn, and their son is Nari or Narfi. Okay. So Loki, yeah, they don't do a good, well, Odin didn't do a great job describing him here, but he's the trickster god, right? He's the one who the gods always have to deal with. He's this one jerk, and you might have a friend like this, who no matter what, you guys will go out, he'll get drunk, and he'll do something stupid, and the whole group will get in trouble for it. And then it'll be up to the people in charge to decide to either let you go, or you have to figure a way out of this. And sometimes Loki actually will get the whole group, Thor especially, Odin, Freya, Baldr. You'll see what Loki does to Baldr. And Loki screws up, gets the group in trouble, and he says, okay, all right, I'm sorry. I'll figure a way out of this. And then sometimes he does. And then the gods keep putting up with it. But as we see later, Loki actually gives birth, which is strange, but not as strange as Heimdall being birthed by 9 different women at the same time. That was kind of strange. No one asked him how the logistics of that worked. Like, oh, Heimdall, you're the son of 9 different maidens? Like, what was your foot was born, then your hand, then your head, then your legs, and then they put you together like a G.I. Joe? That didn't make any sense. But whatever, he was born of 9 different women. Okay, so Loki actually, as a man, which is odd, but he's a male god, but he's the son of 2 giants. So it's literally, he's like the bastard kid that Odin takes in, and all the other gods who are divine have to put up with. But he gives birth to Fenrir, the female goddess Hel, who rules in Hell, and Jormungand, the world serpent. Jormungand, we know later, ends up killing Thor, while Thor kills the world serpent. Fenrir ends up killing Odin, and Hel brings upon the legions of undead armies to destroy Asgard, and eventually leads the way for the Black Ones, Surt, to cleave the world in half and destroy the gods and everybody just dies. And they all know this is going to happen. Loki gives birth to these things, and they're like, can we just get rid of this guy finally? Odin's like, nah, I kind of like him. He can stay. It doesn't, I don't know. It's almost like the gods were resigned to their fate, and they almost assumed that they needed Loki around for Ragnarok to happen, which was foretold in the prophecies. And even the gods couldn't escape that fate. Okay, last of the 9. We move to the Valkyrie. We jump to page 44. There are still others whose duty it is to serve in Valhalla. They bring drink and see to the tables and the ale cups. The Lay of Grimnir names them in the following way. Hrist and Mist, I want to bring me the horn. Skegjold and Skogul, Hild and Thrud, Hlok and Hrftjor, Gol and Gerahold, Rangrid and Radgrid, Renglif, they bring ale to the Einhirar. These women are called Valkyrie. They are sent by Odin to every battle, where they choose which men are to die and they determine who has the victory. Gun and Rota and the youngest Norn named Skuld always ride to choose the slain and to decide the outcome of battle. Earth, the mother of Thor and Rind, and the mother of Vali are counted among the goddesses. Okay. So like I said, the Valkyrie, they're considered divine, but I wouldn't really say they're Aesir. They're kind of like, and if you read this, it's like, this is again where the Marvel movies kind of skip over. The Valkyries are seen as these badass chicks, like that chick on the cover of the heavy metal album. She's riding in on this winged horse and scooping up dudes. It's like, hey, where are we going? It's like, we're going to Valhalla, bro. And he's like, hell yeah. And they go off. But that's not it. It's like, if you read the opening part, it's like, they are there to serve drink and see to the tables and ale cups in Valhalla. So basically, the Valkyrie, when they're not scooping dudes off the battlefield, the Einhirar, they're the Hooters waitresses of heaven. So you go into Valhalla and you're like, oh, hey, it's Joe. It's like, hey, what's up? Mark, hey, Frank, all right, cool. Well, where's our waitress? And the Valkyrie chick comes over. She's wearing her tight orange shorts. She's like, what can I get you fellas? Let me guess. Beer and wings, right? That's right. For eternity. Chop, chop. That was the Valkyrie's job. Yeah, it was cool when they swooped guys off the battlefield, but when they weren't doing that, they were the celestial Hooters waitresses. And that was the Valkyrie. And that's cool, right? That's something we need in Valhalla. These tables aren't going to bust themselves. All right. So yeah, there is really no historical equivalent in Greek mythology for the Valkyrie except the Kyries. And the Kyries were almost like eaters of the dead. The Kyries were these female, not like the Furies, but they were these celestial beings that would wait for the soldiers on the battlefield to die. And when they saw a man struck down or slain, they would literally swoop in like harpies and then devour him. And the devouring of his body whisked him off to Hades. So they weren't really seen as good as the Valkyrie. The Valkyrie, you wanted to see the Valkyrie coming. Like when you saw that Hooters waitress in her chariot and she was pointing to you, she's like, guess where you're going, fella? And you're like, I'm going to Valhalla. Like, you know it. And like you wanted to see a Valkyrie. The Kyries, they were just kind of like carrion birds. So in the Greek world, there really was no equivalent. And I skipped over Loki, but Loki, the Greek equivalent was like Ate. And this was the eldest disowned daughter of Zeus. And she angered him because she tricked him into believing that Hercules was going to be most favored among Zeus's children. But Hera worked out a deal with Ate and fooled Zeus, and thereby Eurystheus became the superior to Hercules. And when Zeus found out, he literally threw Ate down to earth by her hair for fooling him. So she was the trickster, just as Loki was the trickster god in Norse mythology, right? Heimdall is the gatekeeper god. When you find out Hercules dies, I think he's killed by a poison arrow by the centaur. He is deified. He becomes fully divine, and Hercules is made the gatekeeper god of Olympus. So again, Hercules has much in common with Thor as he does with Heimdall. Anyway, this was a quick down and dirty of these 9 gods and the Aesir and the Vanir for Norse literature. For part 3, we'll get into some of the myths, the stories themselves, and you'll see these characters reoccur. But I thought before doing that, part 2 was necessary for you to get a little of a backstory about who these folks were and why we should care. So yeah, the Norse gods in the Prose Edda. This is part 2. I hope you enjoyed this part again. I enjoyed reading it to you. So yeah, we'll pick up in part 3 and we'll get into some of the more detailed myths of the god. We'll learn about Loki and Thor, Odin, Baldr, Frey and Freya, Tyr, and we'll read, I think we'll maybe cap it off with the Ragnarok story, which is cool. It's like the book of Revelations for the Norse world. And yeah, it ties everything in together at the end. And like I said, Loki brings about destruction throughout the whole time. And at the very end, the instruments of destruction, Fenrir the wolf, Jormungand the serpent, Hel, etc., they all come from him. And they still keep him around. Who knows why? Okay. Yeah, so if you like this, give it a thumbs up. If you're liking the channel, you subscribers. If you think anyone would like to learn more about the Aesir and the Vanir and the gods, or the Prose Edda, feel free to share it. But we will see you back for part 3 and the final part of the Prose Edda next time. Till then, take it easy.